Okay, we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to have us go ahead and get started as a few more people join. So I'm going to hand this off to our Chief Program Officer, Katie Shaw, to start the presentation today.
Thank you, Hannah, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining, whether live or listening later. As Hannah said, my name is Katie Shaw, and I'm the Chief Program Officer at Open Supply Hub, based in London. But today you're going to be hearing from a number of our global team. The first thing I'll note is we are recording this session, and we'll be circulating that recording and the deck that we will walk you all through now to all registrants of this session. So if we move on to the next slide and have an overview of what we're going to cover during this webinar. So we'll start with the big question: what is Open Supply Hub? Then we'll have a demo of how to search, as well as how to upload data. And then we'll move into how to make the most of Open Supply Hub before finishing with a live Q&A. I will note that we are covering a lot of ground today. This session is meant to be an overview for all users or potential users of Open Supply Hub. But what I will say is that we've got a wealth of resources for specific stakeholder types or about particular features of Open Supply Hub, and that is all available on our info site. As well as that, our stakeholder engagement associate, India Fallon, is going to be dropping useful links into the chat throughout this webinar. So do keep an eye out for those. And thank you to India for your support with the webinar today. The last thing I'll say in this introduction is that we're also very open to setting up individual follow-up calls if you've got more detailed questions. So do reach out to our info inbox to request a call, or you can also add your questions throughout our Q&A or chat functions, and we'll either cover those off live during the webinar via text responses, or we'll bring them into that Q&A session at the end of the webinar. But for now, let's dive in. So moving on to the next slide, what is Open Supply Hub? Open Supply Hub is an accessible, collaborative supply chain mapping platform used and populated by stakeholders across sectors and across supply chains. And if we move on to the next slide, what we are doing with Open Supply Hub and what we're providing is an open database of hundreds of thousands of facilities. And we'll look at this in a bit more detail later, but every facility that is uploaded to Open Supply Hub is processed by our deduplication algorithm. But we also have our data and moderation team doing great work to check for quality of data coming into the tool and to correct any inaccuracies before they enter the tool, to make sure that we are sharing a really robust data set with our users. And alongside all of that great work from the data and product team, we have support from Open Supply Hub managers, such as Hannah Lynette, our stakeholder engagement manager, and other members of the team. But moving on to the next slide, why is it that we built Open Supply Hub? Why does it exist? And what were the challenges that we were facing? So moving on to the next slide, as many people joining this webinar will know, supply chains are incredibly complex and opaque. But with that opacity and that complexity, many of the greatest issues of our time are able to remain hidden and to proliferate. So if we look at some of those issues, we all know that we're in global supply chains facing challenges around modern slavery, greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, or deforestation. Some of the greatest issues of our time are able to remain hidden in supply chains and to proliferate. But the challenge that we identified is that there are a series of blockers to us being able to work collaboratively to resolve those issues. So what were those blockers? Moving on to the next slide, what we found was that there's an abundance of messy data when it comes to supply chains. So facility name and address data is not standardized, and it's often full of errors. So if you're comparing factory data, it becomes really difficult to know if you're even just talking about the same place. This is also due to the fact that there is no universal facility ID that is free and openly available to all. So current ID schemes are only available in certain systems and/or by paying a fee, and that prevents seamless data exchange between any platform or organization. Tied to that is this issue of inaccessible information. So data is not open or easily accessible to all parties and stakeholders, and that leaves glaring inequalities in terms of who is invited to work on supply chain improvements. And finally, because of all that, there are gaps in coverage when it comes to supply chain data. So data is living in many different places, and those siloed data sets make it really difficult to get a complete picture of global supply chains. So if we move on to the next slide, what we are working on is Open Supply Hub as the solution to solving those problems. And it truly is a collective endeavor. And together, what we're building, as we'll see on the next slide, is a reliable, interoperable data set. So all data that is contributed to the platform, as I briefly mentioned, is cleaned and deduplicated by a matching algorithm. And then every facility or site in Open Supply Hub is assigned its own industry standard ID that is free and accessible to all. So all of that data is living in one common registry. And by using an open data model, anyone wishing to share or search supply chain data can do so in one single place. And what that means in turn is that we're enabling global collaboration. So that user-generated data set gives visibility into which organizations are connected to which facilities, accelerating collaboration. One thing I did want to talk about, if we move on to the next slide, is that there will be many people on this webinar who know us from our roots in apparel. So just very briefly wanted to address what happened to the Open Apparel Registry. So the headline news, if we move on to the next slide, is that Open Supply Hub has replaced the Open Apparel Registry. But three key things to note in that regard. All data from the Open Apparel Registry has been brought over and forms the base data set for Open Supply Hub. So for any OAR users on this call, login details remain the same as on the Open Apparel Registry. Those have been transferred over to Open Supply Hub as well. And for any listeners on the webinar today who are using our API, your API keys have also been brought over to Open Supply Hub. As I said, Open Apparel Registry data forms the base data set for Open Supply Hub, and facilities from the OAR were automatically added apparel as their sector type. And this, what that means altogether will come clear as we head into the demo. I'll also note that those unique IDs that were allocated to facilities in Open Apparel Registry were moved over. The only difference is that instead of being known as an OAR ID, IDs in Open Supply Hub are referred to as Open Supply Hub. And what I will say for users that have come on this journey with us from Open Apparel Registry to Open Supply Hub is to encourage you all to look out for cross-sector overlaps. So as we have new contributors sharing data with Open Supply Hub, we can expect to see cross-sector overlap at the facility level, which in turn will be essential data to enable powerful collaborations. Moving on to the next slide. Just a brief moment to talk about which sectors you can expect to find in Open Supply Hub. So these are the 6 sectors that you see on the screen now are those on which we focused our initial outreach, some of which, such as beauty or sporting goods, are very natural extensions of the apparel sector. So we now accept data for these 6 sectors: apparel, beauty, consumer goods, electronics, furniture, sporting goods, and more. And so with that, I will hand over to Hannah, who's going to do a quick demo of how to search Open Supply Hub.
Thank you, Katie. So let me take us, take us over to Open Supply Hub, which I think we can never say enough is a free and accessible tool for anyone. So anyone on this call, anywhere, you can go to opensupplyhub.org and see exactly what I'm seeing now so that you're able to search our tool of global production facilities. And one piece that I do want to share is that you do have the ability to translate the tool into any of the languages that you see here. So please do, if English is not the language for you, you can use this plugin feature to get a translated version of Open Supply Hub. Okay, so if we're looking at Open Supply Hub here, I'm just going to start by pulling up the whole database. We can see that there are over 138,000 facilities in Open Supply Hub now. And you can see here that if you make any search, as long as it has fewer than 10,000 facilities in the results, you're able to download the results of that search into a CSV or Excel file and get all of the data points that would appear on a facility profile that we'll look at shortly. So always do remember that you can export the data that you need from the tool into a machine readable format so that you can use it. All right, so let's play with some searching. Let's start by looking at a particular facility. So let's say I know the name of a facility, or I know the OSID of that facility. I can type it into this first bar here. And then I know that this is the facility that I'm looking for. So I'm going to click on it here. And what I see when I look at this facility profile is I can see the name of the facility and the OSID. If I want to make any reports around the facility, I think it's a duplicate of another in the database, it's actually closed, or I want to suggest an edit, I can share that information here. I can scroll down to see more information about the location of the facility in different views, the address, GPS coordinates. And then if we move down, we see some of these additional data points like the sector field, which is the newest addition to our database as the Open Apparel Registry expanded to new sectors. You can see parent company, processing type, product type, and number of workers, depending on what has been submitted for this facility. And then if you click on any of sort of the purple links, you can see some of the other versions of that data point that have been submitted by other organizations who've submitted data about that facility. And so we can see, for instance, here, these are the 4 organizations that have submitted this data to Open Supply Hub. And then we could, if we clicked on these other links, be able to see some of the different versions of the sector, processing type, name, or address information that they had each submitted. So that's sort of generally what you can expect to see on an individual facility profile if you're looking for a facility in Open Supply Hub. You can do searches in a bunch of other ways too. So if, for instance, we're interested in the data that's been submitted by a particular organization, so let's say maybe we're interested in learning about the supply chain of the Very Group, we could pull up the data that they've submitted. So they have over 1,200 facilities that they've submitted. Maybe we're interested in looking at fair trade certified facilities. So we can pull up the list of certified facilities that they've shared. That's 112 facilities. Or maybe we're interested in the data that's been submitted by a civil society organization like the Worker Rights Consortium, and we could pull up their data. So you can always sort of search and download data that's been submitted by specific organizations if you want to see it at that level. But where the database really starts to shine is when you start to use different search filters in combination. So if I click on more search filters here, you can see that you can also search by sector, contributor type, all of the additional data points that we offer in the database. And then you can start to layer these different searches on top of each other. So one search that I always really like to show is that if we're looking at the supply chains of a couple different organizations, so let's say we're looking at the data that Amazon has submitted. So we have over 2,000 facilities in that list. And then we're also interested in the data that Target has submitted. And so we're searching for their facilities and we can see they have over 4,000. But what we really want to do is understand the overlap between their two supply chains. So we can pull up both of their lists at once and click this checkbox to show only shared facilities. And now we can see, if we let my computer catch up with me, that we have 173 facilities that are shared between Amazon and Target. So you can start to see that overlap between the different organizations sharing their data. We could also do a search like, let's say we're interested really in electronics data from a couple of these companies. So maybe we're looking at Amazon and Apple, and we want to specifically look at results from the electronics sector. And we can apply that filter and search. And now we have this set of results that are either from the Amazon or Apple list and are in the electronics sector. And then just to show one more example that sort of highlights the different ways you can use our location functionality, let's say, for instance, that we are H&M Group and we're looking to collaborate with CNA. And so we're going to start by looking for the facilities in which our supply chains overlap. So we have 93 facilities. And then let's say actually we're specifically interested in the facilities that are in India. So we're going to narrow the search further. Now we're down to 9. And then we know that we're specifically doing maybe a trip or an auditing report about a specific area. And so we can draw that area on the tool, and that gets us down to 4 facilities that we might want to work with. So the moral of the story, lots of different ways to search the tool, depending on what you're looking for and sort of the focus of whatever you might be using this data for. So please do, it's free and available for you to go on to search, to download data and make use of everything that's been shared here to date. And so now I am going to pop back into the presentation, if you give me one moment. And we're going to talk about how to get all of that data that we were just looking at, how it got into the tool, or how you can upload data into Open Supply Hub. And so I'm going to give a quick overview of how it works, just how data flows through Open Supply Hub. And then some of our team members from our product and data team are going to really dig into the specifics for you today. So at a high level, how does data move through Open Supply Hub? So we start with the different sources of that data. So data gets uploaded from any organization who's connected to production facilities. So that can be brands and retailers sharing their supplier lists. It can be civil society organizations sharing lists of facilities where they're running programs. It can be certification schemas sharing lists of the factories that they have certified. It can be facilities themselves sharing information about their operations, MSIs, service providers, the list goes on. Anyone who's connected to these production facilities can either upload their data via CSV or Excel file, or push it via our API connection, which allows databases to sort of automatically hook into Open Supply Hub and share data. You'll also see some lists in Open Supply Hub that have the term public list next to the name of the data contributor. So this means that our team has found a publicly available data set and uploaded it to Open Supply Hub. So the data is sort of managed on the back end by the Open Supply Hub team, but it still gives you the name of the organization that originally published that data. And then lastly, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later in the presentation, factories and facilities have the ability to claim their profiles, which essentially allows them to say, this is my facility, go through a short verification process, and then add some additional data to their facility profile. In terms of what gets uploaded, we just saw these data points in Open Supply Hub, so we absolutely require country name and address for every facility that's uploaded, and highly recommend uploading sector or product type to help increase the power of the search functionality in our tool. And then you can also add type of facility, type of processing, parent company, and number of workers. We're going to go much more into these 2 pieces, but basically once you've uploaded your data, that's when it goes through the deduplication and sort of cleaning methodology that our platform sits on. And then finally, it's published on our open platform of production facilities that we were just looking at together. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Vanessa, who is going to talk to you about some tips for preparing your data for upload.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hannah. I'm Vanessa. I'm our data and team administrator here at Open Supply Hub. So as we move on to the next slide, as we're talking about our data, the upload that you will do to contribute your data to the platform can be in either 2 formats, a CSV or an Excel file. And we have 7 data points, as Hannah mentioned, 3 of which are required, the country name and address fields. And we highly recommend also submitting sector so that you can gain a full functionality of the platform and incorporate into our additional sectors expansions beyond apparel. And then there's also facility processing type, number of workers, and parent company. The format for these fields has some specific detail, and so I'm going to go over that now. For our country, we require that the name be in English, but you also can submit either the ISO Alpha 2 and ISO Alpha 3. All of those are acceptable formats for the country information. Name, we recommend the full facility name, including incorporation details, which can be abbreviated if you have PVT, LMT for limited. They will not affect the upload between the full name and the abbreviation. For the address information, we recommend the complete address information. We also recommend that you are utilizing the local address configuration for that facility. Address information is not standardized. Address format in the United States is different from address format in Bangladesh. And so we recommend that you use the local format. Commas are the standard punctuation that we recommend between separate address details. And you can follow the prescription for the address information from that local region. For sector and product type, the sector and product type values, we suggest that you incorporate product details or sector details from the brand that is submitting that information and or the facility's production activities that are occurring in the final products that are being produced. When you're submitting these values, these two columns, the sector type and the facility processing type, I'll touch on next, they allow you to enter multiple values. And when you're entering more than one value, we have a format of using a vertical bar to separate that, and we'll see what that looks like in the next slide. Facility type and processing type, again, if you have additional details about the activities that are occurring at a facility, you could enter those here. For number of workers, this value is accepted in either a single value or in a range as listed here, 326 or less than 500. And for the parent company field, this is a field that if you have that information, we are happy to receive it. But if it is unknown, the standard practice is to just leave that field blank. It's not necessary to add an NA value to that cell in the column. And we move on to the next slide. For some helpful tips in prepping your data, Mariel will touch on this later, but through the upload process of information is uploaded and then the list is reviewed. Some of these tips here will prevent your list being returned to you and then having to make adjustments and re-upload. So try to streamline the process. So one call out is no quotation marks. Single quotes are allowable if necessary for your information, but quotation marks will cause an error. We ask that you search and find and replace any NA values that may occur from when you are concatenating your data and pulling that together for your upload submission. To that point, blank columns can be processed. So for any values that you any values outside of the required, which are the name, country, and address. Those values, if they're unknown, you can simply leave them blank. It's not necessary to add the NA field or the unknown descriptive. When compiling your address, we ask that you use single commas to separate the address elements. And if you look here in the examples, we have addresses from two different regions, one from the Netherlands and Brazil, and their formatting is following that prescription of a single comma and the local address format. When compiling your address information, we require one address per row. Unique address details, even if there's a facility group that has multiple locations, the address geolocation is matching 1-to-1. And so we ask that you have a single address in a row. The address details for identifying facility groups will come to light with the additional rows that are submitted on each individual address. For geolocation purposes, the processing of the regions of Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan cannot be assigned China in the processing for the geolocation. So this will return an error. It's not any sort of like geopolitical stance from our organization. It's a requirement of our data and our geolocation to process accurately so that we can have an accurate point in the database and also an assignment on the maps that you'll see on the platform. And as I mentioned, the vertical bar is necessary for our cells that have multiple inputs. Again, the sector and product type values and also the facility type processing type allow for multiple inputs. And so for that, you'll just need a vertical bar to separate the values, and you can see those listed here. On the next slide, we are going to see a description of a facility. So this is a facility, and you'll see all of the details as it's compiled. And then this here is specifically the upload and the formatting of the upload that allowed this facility page to have all of these details, right? And a specific call out to talk about the sector product type value and the facility type processing type, right? As you look at the product type, as it's in the column on the right-hand side of the page, you'll see all of the details of the various products that are offered, whether it's the 5-pocket basic pants, the cargo bottoms, shorts, denim wears. Each of those appearing on a separate line is due to the vertical bar being utilized accurately in the upload. When a vertical bar is absent, the description of the product types would be a single long value that would have all of these terms together in one line. And the same thing goes for the facility type, processing type, when we see cut and sew, final product assembly. Activities that are used and have an ampersand of 2 terms would be together, i.e. cut and sew. But if we were talking about computers and electronics as a term, that would be 2 separate values of computers, vertical bar, electronics. And again, the parent company from this contributor wasn't available, and that field was left blank. And so this would be the information for a facility upload. And I'll turn it over to Marielle now, I believe.
Thanks, Vanessa. I'm Marielle Sabra. I'm the product manager at OS Hub, and I'm going to talk about what happens to your data after you click upload. So I'll start by just going through some of the workflow steps. And these are mostly the same as what existed for Open Apparel, with a few key differences. And these changes were introduced because we're very focused on our data quality and making sure that data coming into the system is of a high quality, and that we maintain that quality going forward. So the first one of these changes that we made from OAR to OS Hub is a step called list approval. So this is where our team takes a look at data coming into the system, and we'll do kind of a preliminary check with kind of manual tools as well as some programmatic tools to just make sure that if the system will flag errors with your data later on, that we can touch base with you early on, get those corrected so that all of your data can get uploaded and published to the site. So that's the first step. After approval, the data moves on to processing and geocoding. And the processing step is where the data is going to be parsed into the system into a machine readable format that our algorithms can work with. Errors that might be flagged in the processing step are usually formatting things that Vanessa mentioned, like double quotes being present or spelling errors in a country name. After processing, we move on to geocoding, which is where the facility data is plotted on the map. So based on the address information that was provided, we plot that facility in the country where it exists, in the town, the street, etc. Issues that can come up in the geocoding process are things like what Vanessa mentioned, with an address value not matching up with an expected country value for that facility. So again, those are things that we try to flag in the list approval step, but they might also be caught in the processing and geocoding step. So from there, the data moves on to the matching step. And this is where incoming data into the tool is compared against all of the existing facilities in the tool. So the name and address pair for a facility that's coming into the tool is compared against all the other facility profiles that already exist. And from matching, there are 3 possible outcomes for a facility. The first of which is that a new facility could be created. This is where the system didn't find any match that already exists in OS Hub. So it creates a new facility profile and assigns a new OS ID. The second possible outcome is something called confirm and reject. And this is essentially where the computer is asking, or the system is asking for human verification. It's not quite sure if there's a match or not. And then the last possible outcome is that the incoming data is matched to an existing facility. And in that case, that data gets associated with an existing OSID and added to the facility profile as an additional contribution on that profile. And next, I'm going to talk more about the matching and confirm and reject process. So how does OS Hub match facilities? And to answer that question, I just want to touch on a little bit about what the machine learning that we have in the system and how we're doing that. So at the core of OS Hub is a machine learning algorithm that makes decisions about whether an incoming facility, let's call it facility A, matches facility B, an existing profile on the platform. And this sort of machine learning model is known as a predictive model. And predictive models are sort of trying to answer the question, is X true? And X could be a number of different things. In OS Hub's case, X is an address and data about a facility. It could also be facial recognition, like what you use to unlock your phone, or it could be soccer balls or footballs. And so the degree or the ease with which X can be answered, so is this facility a match with this other facility, or is there a soccer ball in this picture or not? The ease with which that question can be answered, it depends a lot on the context and the quality of the information coming into the system and how many times the system has seen other data like that data before. So the reason that there are so many footballs on this screen is because you can kind of tell as you move down the screen that in some of these pictures, it's very easy to tell that there's a soccer ball on the screen. And then as you move down, it becomes harder and harder to figure out if there is a soccer ball on the screen. And so when our system isn't sure if there's a soccer ball on the screen or if there's a match between incoming data and existing data on the platform, it asks a member of our team to verify the information. And so that brings me to confirm reject and kind of the more concrete details around what matching, how match decisions are made. So on the next slide, so these three categories correspond to those three outcomes that I talked about in my first slide. And so the system will assign a confidence score to each of these categories or to each facility match coming into the system. The first category, where the confidence score is between 1 and 0.8, it's going to either create a new facility because it is so certain that there's no match, or it is so certain that there is a match that it just associates with an existing facility or it creates a new facility. But the point is that in that case, it's really certain. The green square on the right is where the system is really uncertain, or excuse me, really certain that there is no match with an existing facility on the platform. So it sees incoming facility data and it reads everything that's already in the database and it says, nope, I'm not confident that there's any match in the system. So it assigns a confidence score of 0.49 or below. And then this middle ground, which is where confirm and reject lives, is where the system reads the incoming data and everything that already exists in the database. And it says, I'm not quite sure. I need a member of the data team to verify whether this is a match. I think I might have found a match, but I'm not quite sure based on variations that exist in the name, different translations, different acronyms being used, and then maybe certain elements of an address being present or missing from the data. So that's how the matching, that's how all of the matching works. And I'm going to hand it back to Hannah to take it from here.
Thank you, Marielle. And so, yeah, let's pretend we've prepared our data, just like Vanessa shared. It's been uploaded and gone through the process that Marielle just described, and it's now live in Open Supply Hub. And so what we want to talk about is that is by no means the end of the journey and what is available to you with Open Supply Hub. Once you've uploaded your data, now is the opportunity to start making the most of it. And so I'm just going to talk about some stories and sort of inspiration for how organizations have made the most of their data once it's in Open Supply Hub. And so to start, and going back to sort of the reason why we exist and what Katie was talking about at the beginning, you can find opportunities for collaboration with the facilities that you have uploaded. And so I'll dig into each of these specific ways that you might do that. So the first is, if you're working with a specific facility, you can do that search that I did at the beginning, search for that facility and look for the different organizations who are connected to that facility to know who you might be able to collaborate with. Do you want to do shared auditing? Are you investing in programs at that facility? Are you interested in doing sort of site visits collaboratively? Are you interested in bringing green technology? Whatever it might be, there are all kinds of opportunities. You start to understand who are the different organizations who sort of form that ecosystem around that facility, who you can work with. Secondly, if you are particularly interested in collaborating with another organization, you can run that search that I showed where you look at the overlap between two organizations' data. So maybe it's your organization and another organization that you might be partnering with or collaborating with. And then you can start to understand, okay, these facilities that overlap between our two lists, these are the facilities we might want to focus on in our efforts. And then lastly, you can really utilize the download feature by downloading your list from Open Supply Hub, and then you'll be able to see all of the organizations who are connected to each of your facilities. So that's available in that CSV or Excel file. And then it's just some quick Excel manipulation to start to understand which of those other organizations are showing up the most in that download. And then you start to understand these are the organizations who are maybe best poised to be collaborators in the work that you're doing on your supply chain. Some quick stories to sort of illustrate how this has worked for others. So Global Conservation NGO, WWF, their water team is essentially searching for their water conservation zones on Open Supply Hub, and then doing that download that I just talked about to understand which organizations are showing up the most in connections to production facilities in those zones. And that really helps them target their partnership and their conservation work. Instead of having to go to every brand or organization and say, hey, are you sourcing from this region? We're interested in working with you. They have a targeted list that they can reach out to for collaboration and partnership. Similarly, ASOS in times of crisis is able to figure out who are the other organizations connected to their facilities so they can share information and figure out sort of action steps together for how they want to support or work with facilities in crisis zones. And then lastly, with civil society organizations like the Worker Rights Consortium, they're able to quickly see which brands are sourcing from which facilities so that they can work on remediating cases where there are labor rights issues. Okay, so the next way that you can make the most of your data in OS Hub is to share that you are sharing your data on OS Hub so that organizations know that your data is there and can reach out to you for those different opportunities that I was just describing. So we've seen lots of different versions of this. You're able to share a link to your data on your website. When you pull up your data, when you're searching in Open Supply Hub, you can just grab the URL of that search and put that on your website, and it will link directly to your data from your site. Or you could link in publications, reports, sustainability reports, etc. My colleague India just dropped a link into the chat. We provide language and graphics for you to make that easy so that you can share your data with others. And then lastly, we also offer a feature called an embedded map that allows you to essentially pull a customized map of the data that you have uploaded to Open Supply Hub onto your website. I will just briefly say, we've talked about how Open Supply Hub is completely free for anyone to search and download data from, and also to share data to. We do offer 2 premium features as part of our model that are available for a fee. One is the API connection that we've referred to a couple of times in the webinar. The other is this feature, our embedded map. So essentially the idea here is you've uploaded data to Open Supply Hub. You can pull just your data and even additional data points that you're interested in sharing that aren't available in the full Open Supply Hub, and sort of format them into a customized map on your website that has the data points you want, that has some customizations to match your brand, and that will automatically update with your data data whenever you update Open Supply Hub, but you don't have to do the custom building yourself. We take care of that for you. So if you're interested in learning more, we dropped a link in the chat, and you're also welcome to reach out, and we can talk about what specifically might work for you. And then just some quick examples of organizations who've made use of Open Supply Hub and are sort of sharing it on their websites or in their work. Columbia Sportswear Company, you just saw a screenshot of their embedded map on the last screen. They were really looking for a mapping tool to help them share their supply chain data on their website that would be really easy for their team to sort of use and update. And along the way, realized that they were able to use this embedded map to meet the requirements of multiple industry assessors. And so they were able to add additional data points and take advantage of the formatting to meet the requirements or to gain more points in the Fashion Transparency Index, the Transparency Pledge, and more. And then also the factory group, Veshin Factory, really wanted to be able to communicate their sort of values around transparency to their clients. So being able to link to their data and put an embedded map on their website was a really great way for them to be able to do that. All right, next sort of way to make the most of your data is really honing in on those IDs. So these are the OS IDs that we've talked about a couple of times in this webinar. Each facility in Open Supply Hub has this OS ID that's free and accessible for anyone to grab and use, to be sure that if you're collaborating at the facility level and you share an OS ID with someone, you have confidence that you are in fact talking about the same place. And so lots of different ways that you can make use of those IDs. The two sort of big buckets are how you're sharing your data with others. So if you are collaborating with other organizations, that you're sharing the OS IDs of the facilities that you're working with as sort of the source of truth and decoder as you're working together to make that interaction easy and interoperable. And then you can also use the OS IDs internally in your own systems. We know that in many organizations today, there are many different teams, platforms, service providers, technologies that are all touching supply chain data, and they may all have slightly different formatting, maybe even different ID systems within their ecosystems. These OS IDs can sort of be the ID schema that runs across all of those different systems and teams internally as well to help you sort of keep your data clean and easy to work with. And so you can always download the data that you have uploaded to Open Supply Hub to get the IDs for all of your facilities and begin using them in that way. And so many stories of different organizations who are making use of the OS ID. Fair Factories Clearinghouse is working to bring data from all kinds of different multi-stakeholder initiatives together. And of course, all of those different initiatives and service providers have different ID schemas. So one ID schema that acts as a decoder and runs across all of those different data sets was really key to sort of making that shared data set a reality. We have the brand Mammoet, who are really trying to step up their game in terms of visualizations and analysis of their supply chain, and having OS IDs running across all of their different systems is what really allowed them to start to do that and pull all of their data together in one place. And then lastly, SLCP, sort of making use of OS IDs as this common language that all of their users can sort of be speaking as they're pulling data in and out of their platform. And then the last sort of bucket around how you can make the most of your data in Open Supply Hub is this idea of facility claims. So I talked about this feature a little bit earlier in the webinar, but if you are an owner or senior manager of a facility, you have the ability to claim your facility in Open Supply Hub. And similarly, if you are an organization that's working with facilities and you would like them to claim their facilities, we have language that, that we can share with you that you can use to reach out to the facilities that you've uploaded to Open Supply Hub, let them know they're on the platform, and encourage them to claim their profiles. When a facility claims their profile, they go through a short verification process. We're basically checking, are they who they say they are? Are they affiliated with the facility they say they're affiliated with? If so, then the owner or senior manager is able to add additional information to facility profiles. So this can include MOQs, lead times, certifications, contact information, descriptions. So facilities really have an opportunity to build out a really robust profile. And so a couple of examples of how that's benefited different organizations. Fairtrade USA, in uploading their Fairtrade certified facilities, is really looking for a way to help brands find Fairtrade certified facilities that they might want to source from. And so Fairtrade USA is encouraging all of their certified facilities to claim their profiles. So then those facilities have these nicely built out platforms that when brands are trying to search Fairtrade certified facilities on Open Supply Hub, can get all of the information they need to make their sourcing decisions. And then lastly, Here Duramani Group, who really used the opportunity to sort of upload and claim their facilities in Open Supply Hub as the time to sort of standardize and think about what are the ways that we're sharing our name and address information across different stakeholders and clients and service providers, and sort of bring a new level of standardization to their work. And so with that, I hope that inspires you to be a part of Open Supply Hub in some way, whether searching and making use of the data or uploading to the tool. We have a wide ecosystem of organizations who are supporting and making use of Open Supply Hub, including our funders, who we are incredibly grateful to, as well as nearly 600 organizations who are now uploading or contributing data to Open Supply Hub. And you can just see a handful of them listed here on this slide. So you'd be in good company if you joined the Open Supply Hub community. And I will end before we go to our Q&A with a quote from our executive director upon the launch of Open Supply Hub. Industry has been asking for this kind of open data for years. Now OS Hub helps all of us solve the world's major challenges together, from public companies reporting to investors to people advocating for improved worker rights. It's about democratizing access to data and opening up supply chains for global good. And so we do hope you'll join us in trying to achieve that mission collaboratively together. If you have questions, we'll dive into the Q&A now. We also have a resources library on our website and a frequently asked questions page. I do also want to mention that if you or any of your partner organizations or organizations you work with are based in Bangladesh, India, Turkey, or Vietnam, we do have community managers based in and working in those countries and able to communicate with stakeholders in the local language. So please do reach out if you'd like to set up meetings with any of those members of our team. And whoever you are, you're always welcome to email us to set up a call or demo, and we're happy to talk to you and make sure that you know how to use Open Supply Hub for your work. And so with that, Katie, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to you for our Q&A.
Thank you so much to Hannah and the rest of the team. I hope everyone found that a really useful session. We've had a lot of questions coming through in the Q&A chat, some of which we've been answering live via text. So do take a spin through to see the questions and answers there. But we've saved some of the questions until the end, partly because there's a little bit more nuance to them, but I may also ask for a little bit of clarification on what some of the questions are referring to exactly. So starting with the questions from Michael Lynn, can we remove the previous wrong contribution and how to correct the previous contribution? There's a couple of different ways to answer that question. So where organizations no longer work with facilities or don't have a facility live on their supplier list, they can refresh their supplier list and that data at whatever cadence they're doing that work. So they can remove facilities with whom they're no longer collaborating. And when they refresh their data on Open Supply Hub, the connection between that organization and that facility will be broken and will no longer be visible on the front end. What we don't do is delete data from Open Supply Hub, because just because, for example, Mammoet, who Hannah was talking about earlier, just because they might stop working with a particular facility doesn't necessarily mean that that facility no longer exists. So we want to retain that facility in the tool. If there's a simple typo or an error of a sort of in the address or the name of a facility, there's a few different ways that can be corrected. It may well be caught in the review stage before that facility makes it onto the platform. So the work that our data and moderation team is doing. If it does make it into the platform, but you come across more accurate details for that facility, we'd encourage you to resubmit that facility to Open Supply Hub, and it will then match to the existing entity in the tool, and that improved quality data will be available for everyone to see. So hopefully that answers the two questions from Michael. I'm going to turn the next question over to Marielle. So we've had a question from Wilfried, who's asking, will it be possible to add lat-long pairs to upload files when they are already available and or not possible to geocode based on address? So if you can talk through some of the developments on lat-long, that would be great, Marielle.
Sure. So the short answer is yes, it's possible to upload Latin long coordinates. However, we do encourage you, where you have address information, it should still be included. Our system can't handle facilities that only have Latin long right now, and it also helps with additional data coming into the tool. If one supplier or one contributor submits only Latin long information and then another supplier provides only address information, the system can't handle that mismatch right now. So even if you just have the city or country where the facility exists, it's still really helpful and required right now for that information to exist. We are looking at changes to the algorithm to enable Latin long only contributions, but you can submit the Latin long information, and that will override the part of the geocoding process where we assign, or the geocoder assigns, Latin long.
Great, thank you so much, Marielle. I'm going to hand the next question over to Hannah, and we've had a question saying the system seems very good for the who, where, and what, but we're looking at other aspects of our supply chain, such as ethical standards, materials used. We want a single point for all CSR ESG type aspects. Is this covered or planned in your system?
Such a good question, and one that we hear all the time. And so I think to start in answering this, we want to center on sort of why does Open Supply Hub exist, and sort of go back to that conversation from the start of this webinar, which is we are sort of this standardized database that everybody can turn to for really high quality name and address data. So essentially being able to understand sort of where is the facility and who is connected to it, which I think you pointed out really nicely in your question. From there, you get that ID number that ideally is existing in all of these different platforms and service providers across sort of the supply chain landscape, and allows you to easily connect any different data sets you might be working with. And so for us, sort of at where we stand right now and sort of the vision for the future, what we see as powerful is the ability to sort of have this base data set where you have sort of, these are the facilities that I'm working with, these are the IDs for those facilities, and then the ability to easily connect that data to any of the other types of organizations or service providers or data sets that you might be working with. I will also say that when the Open Apparel Registry first launched, we only sort of accepted and required country name and address as data points. And of course, we have grown since then to add additional data points. And that growth, those additional data points were added with really considered stakeholder engagement that we did with a variety of different organizations from across different stakeholder types to understand the needs coming from users in the sector. And so when we sort of matched that with our sort of desire to be this organization that's pushing standardization for data, we found the set of data points that you see in Open Supply Hub now to be sort of the highest opportunity areas. These were data points that were being required or being disclosed in so many many different places that there was really this high opportunity for standardization and openness around that data point. And so in the future, we can certainly imagine expanding the data points that are in Open Supply Hub and going through a similar process of understanding sort of what are the needs of users and what data is existing openly at a scale that it's sort of necessary to move into this place of standardization. We'll never be the place where sort of all of the data about supply chains or facilities in the world are hosted. There are all of these specialized platforms and service providers who are doing really deep work in that way. And so that's where the IDs really come into play, so that if you as an organization are trying to get that one-stop shop that you mentioned, you have that ID, that decoder ID that allows you to pull in whatever data sets you might be working with into whatever the platform is that sort of you're building internally.
Great, thank you so much for that, Hannah. I'm going to group together a few different questions that we've had come through that I can give relatively quick answers to. So from Karen in the chat, for effectiveness and in-time accuracy of the data that has been uploaded, how often should contributors be updating their factory lists? Will OS Hub be developing requirements around that? So Karen, great question. We do not mandate the cadence at which data should be refreshed on Open Supply Hub. Some organizations are updating their supplier data on a fortnightly or monthly basis. Other organizations are only doing that work once per year. And we leave it up to the contributing organizations to refresh their data at the cadence which best suits their need. So hopefully that answers that question there for you, Karen. We've had a few questions come through relating to when facilities move or when they change their address or their name. We'll group those all together as one question, and I'll ask Hannah to speak to that. But the first thing that I'll say before we have Hannah speak through some of the detail of facility moves is that it is possible, and Hannah showed this in the demo, to report when a facility has closed in Open Supply Hub. We were open about our registry for a long time. So in Open Supply Hub, you can flag a number of different things on facility profiles, including when a facility has closed. But I'll let Hannah give some of the detail around name changes or movement of facilities and how their OS IDs are linked.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, if you have information about a facility having closed or moved, you can share that information with us, and then we can sort of reflect that reality in Open Supply Hub. I think, as Katie maybe said earlier, it is extremely rare that we delete any data in the tool about a facility. We would only delete a facility from the tool if it were sort of a fake facility that had been uploaded by accident. Like you can imagine somebody uploading test facility 123 or something like that. And so when we talk about sort of facility closures and moves, it's about updating the data that we have to reflect the reality that exists today, not about sort of deleting a facility because it no longer exists or something like that. So essentially, if you report to us that a facility has closed or the facility has moved, we have the ability to then, if it's sort of a move from one address to another, to show that this facility has closed and then this facility has moved to this new facility profile that's in the tool. So you can just reach out to us and let us know either by flagging on the profile itself or by shooting us an email, and then we're able to moderate and reflect that report in the database.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So moving to another couple of quick questions, being very conscious of time. We've had a question around whether OS Hub is available for food companies. We have food company data coming in from many multi-category retailers already, so very much possible there. Another question that we've had is around, are facilities aware that their facility is openly listed on Open Supply Hub? And we've also had a question around whether it's best practice to notify facilities. Again, we leave that up to organizations. It's often dependent on your relationship with facilities. But as Hannah talked through earlier, one really powerful mechanism that is available to senior managers or facilities is for them to claim their profiles and add additional data points. And India shared in the chat earlier some suggested text for reaching out to facilities to let them know that they're listed on a free open data platform that is being used by hundreds of organizations across multiple sectors, and to add some detail to their profiles there. I'm very conscious of time, so please do get your final questions in here. For those who are able to stay on the line for a little bit longer, we can happily go through some more questions there. So noted, Efrain, your work with Fashion Revolution Mexico. Please do follow up with us via email afterwards, and we'd love to speak with you about how we can collaborate with the work that you're doing there. And then the final point that I'll note is we had a question about whether this session is being recorded and will be made available, and it will be made available to all registrants to the webinar afterwards. And with that, I think apologies for those whose questions we didn't quite get to, but I think we will wrap it there. Thank you so much for your attendance and your attention, and for all your great questions. Anything else that you would like to follow up with, please do. You can reach us at info@opensupplyhub.org.